guys! In this video, we are looking at one of the more challenging tasks in your English literature exams, and that is comparing poetry. Now, it's actually a lot less intimidating than it seems, because there's an effective, systematic way of going about comparing poems well. And in this video, I'm going to break it all down into 5 clear steps for you. So stick around till the end to find out just exactly what they are. Now, step 1 is to summarize the main idea of each poem in 1 to 2 sentences. So the first thing we tend to do when given any poem is to, well, read it. But we're unlikely to understand everything about a poem after the first read. So the temptation then arises for us to read and reread and reread again. Now, this isn't a problem in normal non-exam circumstances, but if we're racing against time in an exam condition, then here's a better tactic. Read the poem once, then write down your preliminary impressions, read the poem twice, and summarize the main idea of the poem. Now, some guiding questions to help you with this would include: what is the main gist of the poem's content? How do I feel after reading this poem? What are some themes or ideas that immediately jump out at me? And is there anything special or weird about this poem? But hold on, what if I really don't get the poem after reading it just once or twice? Well, obviously, there's room to take once or twice liberally, so no issues if you have to reread a couple of times before you feel like you can summarize anything. My point here is simply not to get sucked into an endless process of reading and rereading and rereading, because before long you'll have whittled all your time away only to have very little to show for at the end. So to prevent this, just go ahead and pick up a pen and start actively engaging with the poem by scribbling down your thoughts on a planning sheet. This is going to help you start putting together an argument than simply keeping everything in an abstract, befuddled jumble in your head. Step 2 is to find any similarities between the poems. So it's helpful to think about similarities in terms of aspects of analysis, which would include themes, style, structure, and form. So go ahead and ask yourself, what thematic, stylistic, structural, or formal features do the 2 poems share? And we can make this brainstorm process easier by sketching a table like this. An important side note here, by the way, your ability to spot similarities and differences across poems is going to be based to a large extent on your familiarity with some of the technical basics, i.e., we can't spot a metaphor if we don't know what metaphor means, and we certainly won't know that a poem is a sonnet if we don't know what the structure of a sonnet is. So make sure you sort out the fundamentals first, because a wobbly foundation is going to hamper your chances of doing well in any poetry analysis task, whether it be comparative or unseen. For an overview of some of the most important terms in language, structure, and form, you can go ahead and check out my video here. Now, step 3 is to find differences from the similarities we have just identified. Perhaps it sounds a bit ironic, but it actually makes sense, because both poems could share the same thematic concern, but they're most likely going to portray it in different ways. So for instance, both poem A and B could be about love, but while poem A is about unrequited love, poem B could be about mutual love. So the guiding questions for this step would include: how do the poems present the same theme in different ways? How do the poets use the same stylistic, structural, or formal techniques to present different aspects of the same theme? Now, usually our analysis of the quotations from each poem would naturally open up points of divergence between the poems, because obviously the content of the quotations is going to be different, regardless of the poems sharing the same techniques. So instead of creating a new table, go ahead and add an extra line underneath each aspect of analysis in the similarities table to address how each similarity differs across the poems, like this. Now, once we've reviewed all the differences and similarities, we can then zoom out and see if there are still other fundamental points of divergence between the poems, i.e., is there something in poem A that's totally absent from poem B, and vice versa? If you spot these and it serves your argument to include these points, then feel free to add them in your table. So now that we've mapped out all the similarities and differences, it's time to zoom in on how the theme is presented from various angles through the use of style, structure, and form. This means going back to the quotations we've sourced for the stylistic, structural, and formal categories in each table, and looking at how these quotations present the theme in different ways through the poet's use of these respective techniques. Now, the purpose of this is for us to identify 3 main points of discussion for our main body section, which could look something like this. Together, your 3 main body points should cover the entirety of both texts and not be limited to just one section of each poem. As for the techniques used, these should come in organically as part of your analysis as you explain how the poets convey these ideas through the use of metaphor, rhyme, imagery, irony, etc. Now, our final step is to summarize the poem's similarities and differences in a comparative statement. This should be the guiding thesis for your essay, which also doubles as your main line of argument and will go on to cascade into points of analysis for your main body section. Now, it may seem a bit odd to work backwards by coming up with the introductory thesis at the end of our planning process, but it works because when you think about it, your argument is essentially a distillation of your main points, which are, after all, the specifics in your main body paragraphs. To formulate the thesis, you can use comparative sentence structures like the following. Note that your comparative thesis should largely be thematic in nature, i.e., it should spell out how a theme is portrayed across both poems. So, do you also spell out the techniques used across the poems? Well, it depends. If you think it helps clarify your focus as you go on to write the rest of your essay, you can add one follow-up sentence after the comparative thesis to summarize the technical overlaps and divergences between the poems. For example, after your comparative thesis, you could write, Poem A relies mainly on comparative devices and imagery, while Poem B features personification and rhyme to convey the nuances of such and such, etc. But again, this is largely optional. So there you go, guys. That's it for this video, the 5 steps to comparing any poems and to do so in a comprehensive and effective manner. If you found this video in any way helpful, please give this video a like and subscribe to my channel so that I can keep making awesome English literature study videos for you all. Also, if you want to see how I put these 5 steps into practice, check out my blog post, which I'll link to in the description box below, in which I'll demonstrate by comparing Carol Ruman's The Emigre and Seamus Heaney's Storm on an Island, which are both GCSE Power and Conflict poems. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys very soon.